Welcome, friends. Welcome to Global Focus, your go-to podcast for sharp geopolitical insights and deep dive analysis of global affairs. I am Hari Prakash Sinha, and today we will discuss a crucial topic that could reshape the world politics. Trump 2.0, a disaster for Europe in every way, and more importantly, what it means for India. To break it all down, we have a distinguished guest with us, Dr. Adityanjee, President of the Council for Strategic Affairs, a leading expert in international relations and strategic policy making. His insights will help us decode the potential disruptions in global trade, security alliances, and economic shifts if Donald Trump returns to power. Dr. Adityanjee, welcome to Global Focus. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Mr. Trump has already returned to power. It's not a question of if he returns to power. He has already returned to power.
Yeah.
And he's live and kicking.
Actually, this topic was lying with me for quite some time. So that's why a bit of mistake. So moving to my first question, how will Trump 2.0 impact India-Europe trade relations? So what do you say about it?
Look, Trump behaves in a very unpredictable and chaotic manner.
I see.
So you have to follow the theory of chaos. But when you see theory of chaos, there is predictability in unpredictability. And you can find certain patterns in that chaotic environment. So issue is that how Trump's interactions with EU or Europe have impact on India. Now, there's a variable that you can predicate upon. That was Trump 1.0.
Yes.
So if we look at Trump 1.0, he took somewhat of a isolationist and mercantilistic point of view. He threatened to disband NATO because European countries were not contributing enough to their defense.
Yeah.
And he wanted to put tariffs on certain countries, including China. But he was upset about trade imbalances with every country that US had. And his attempts were to renegotiate any trade agreements. He was highly cynical of free trade agreements or free trade areas kind of thing, and chose to deal on a bilateral basis. You see the same thing happening at this point in time. So the initial tariffs that have been announced are on Canada, Mexico, and China. But let's not be very sort of sanguine about it. The turn of other countries, including Europe, will come because there's a trade deficit in favor of EU as far as US is concerned. And the same situation is with India. The bilateral trade between US and India is in India's favor at this point in time. And even Trump 1.0, he was very concerned about protectionist tendencies or tariffs by India on Harley Davidson motorcycles.
Right, sir.
So as he spends more time, he will have more time to focus on relationship with EU or Europe, specifically trade relations. So there may be some tariffs on EU because the idea for Trump would be to minimize the trade deficit with the EU, and the only way he thinks is by putting on tariffs. And the same tactic may be used against India. Let's be not fooled by the bonhomie or general myth prevalent in India that Trump would be beneficial for India or would be friendly to India. Trump is only friendly to Trump. It is doubtful if Trump would be friendly to even US. So it will be a very fluid, very dynamic, very unpredictable situation of future Trump-led administration dealing with EU and dealing with NATO, which are kind of two different entities, and the backlash that is generated, how would that affect India? Would that have impact on India? So we can logically assume if Trump puts tariffs on Europe or EU, which is an economic grouping, and Trump puts tariffs on India, that is a very fertile ground for India and EU to soften the stances against each other. India has been trying to negotiate a bilateral free trade agreement with EU, and
Yeah.
they have reservations on part of EU.
Right, sir.
And the reason for those reservations is that they are very arrogant. They believe that they rule the world, they make the rules along with US. Now, when they are on the receiving end, they might feel that it is advantageous in their long-term interest to have good trade relations with India, which has a emerging middle class. At this point in time, Indian middle class is more than 500 million, and country is growing at 6 to 7% rate in terms of GDP, and India has become the fifth largest in terms of dollar terms, nominal terms in the GDP, and expected to surpass even Japan and Germany and become the third largest in terms of nominal terms, in terms of dollar economy by 2028. So if the writing is on the wall and EU feels threatened by tariffs from the United States, which is their largest trading partner, they might actually soften their stance and try to understand Indian point of view that trade is not just trade in goods. There's trade in services, trade in professional services. So if both are on the receiving end from a isolationist, protectionist US, the world will adjust to a new equilibrium, all the players in the world, and possibly in future, in a situation of crisis, EU may decide to agree into bilateral free trade area with India, and possibly may choose to trade in terms of euro or pounds or whatever, bypassing the dollar. That possibility remains. But all this is hypothetical. It is predicated on what steps more belligerent Trump 2.0 administration will take. And yes, it is definitely much more belligerent, much more unpredictable uh, sort of entity in the global arena. Having said that, I see patterns in the unpredictability. The patterns are A, to secure and concretize and memorialize US trade advantages with any trading partner, minimize the trade deficits, increase the export of American-made armaments to balance the trade, and have an expansionist foreign policy. Ironically, in the first term, Mr. Trump postulated and tried to implement an isolationist policy. This term, he is not talking about isolationist policy. It is definitely an expansionist, hegemonic, and imperialistic foreign policy.
See. So, will Trump's return further weaken NATO and European security? How does this affect India?
Well, Trump has already returned. He's in office. He's acting. In the
Yeah.
first term, he had put a deadline or benchmark for NATO countries that each of those countries have to pay more for the defense budget.
Mhm.
And in 2015, NATO had decided that each country should strive for at least 2% of their defense budget, 2% of their national budget for defense. And under Trump's threat, some of the countries increased their defense expenditure. Now, NATO has also enlarged, so now it is 32 countries. And there are still around 10 countries, their defense budgets are less than 2%. And most of them will try to increase their defense budgets for more than 2%. But issue is that will Trump be satisfied in his second term with that 2% budget, or he will carry out his threat, which he had given in the first term, to disband NATO? So again, that becomes an unpredictable situation. He was not able to disband NATO in the first term. In this term, mind you, he has emerged stronger. He is wiser. He has experience of governing. He controls all the instruments of governance in United States, controlling all the three, branches in a way, the executive branch, which is hyper-muscular and ever expanding, the Congress, both chambers, the Senate and House of Representatives are controlled by his party. And in U.S. Supreme Court, where nominations are done by the president and confirmed by the Supreme Court, 6 out of 9 judges are Republicans. So in other words, all the institutions of governance in the United States are either under Trump control or Trump friendly. So in that situation, you will see much more aggressive action and possibly maybe even disbanding of NATO. That is not hypothetical situation. But anyway, whatever is the US stance towards NATO, what does it have to do with India? NATO does not defend India. India does not have any bilateral kind of relationship with NATO. So in my own mind, NATO is irrelevant. It should have been disbanded after the breakdown of Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So I don't think it affects India in any way, whether NATO remains or NATO does not remain. India has to guard her own sovereignty and her own security. In fact, in a way, if NATO is disbanded, a colonial institution would be brought down to earth, and you will see less pressure from European countries, either individually or collectively on India on certain issues that they have been sort of putting traditionally, whether it is certain agitations or sponsored agitations and things like that, or so-called human rights issues. So that situation, end of NATO, would be good for India.
Suppose Trump disbands NATO, will it have any big impact on the international relations, geopolitics, I mean?
Of course, it will have impact on mainly confined to Europe or maybe Western Alliance versus China. What will happen that EU countries will have to take lead in developing a common European defense, which they've talked about in the past. Germany and France have talked about leading, or forming a European defense. And of course, it will probably have beneficial effect for Russia. Trump wants to have friendly relations with Russia and Putin. It may lead to end of the war that is happening in Ukraine. It may lead to possibly partitioning of Ukraine. All those are speculative things. So yes, it definitely will have impact on geopolitics, because besides the United States, it's the NATO and European countries that are aggravating the war in Ukraine, unnecessarily, instigating Zelensky to continue to fight. In fact, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew to Kiev in
Mm.
April of 2022 when there was a ceasefire agreement between both the parties, and he basically junked the ceasefire agreement. And even the current NATO General Secretary or Secretary General has told Zelensky not to negotiate from point of weakness and wait for time when Ukraine is in a more powerful situation. So yes, there will be some impact on European geopolitics. There may be some impact on Europe-China relationship, etc., etc. But I don't think it should substantially affect India in any way because India does not depend on NATO for anything.
Right, sir, right, sir. So coming to my next question, could a Trump 2 Euro presidency trigger another global economic crisis?
I
What?
think we are definitely going towards a situation when there may be trade wars. Uh, Even the delaying of tariffs against Canada and Mexico for another 30 days may not resolve the situation. In fact, if you see, there is some hot mic leakage of Justin Trudeau's comments in a US Canada business meeting in which he says that what Trump has told him that he's serious about quote unquote swallowing Canada and just using actually economic pressure to bring them down to their knees.
Mm,
So yes, they will be. And at this point in time, 80% of Canadians don't want to become 51st state.
yeah.
In fact, some of the Canadian provinces have started to already take retaliatory measures against United States. So what Trump's global megalomaniac ambitions are is to take over Canada, rename the Gulf of Mexico as Gulf of America, take over the Panama Canal, take over Greenland, purchase Greenland, by force take over Gaza and develop into Middle Eastern or West Asian Riviera. I
Mhm.
think these are some far-fetched sort of goals which are highly imperialistic and expansionist and hegemonic. For last 100 years or so, United States has been tom-tomming to the rest of the world that we are not an imperialistic nation, we are not hegemonic, we don't covet any other country's territory. But that is exactly what you're doing. When you say that you will take over one country and make it part of your country, you
Yeah.
will take over Panama Canal, you will rename name certain areas in your neighborhood, and you will take over whether you buy or forcibly occupy Greenland. If it is not expansionism and imperialism, then what it is? So we are going to have definitely possibility of a trade war because the countries that are targeted, they are being targeted individually, not collectively, and each one will have to respond to that situation. If China is targeted, China will retaliate in terms of counter tariffs. They did it in the past and they are doing it now. So we will have a less globalized trading system. There'll be a lot of trading conflicts, and the current agency, that is WTO, may not be able to contain or manage these trading conflicts, leading to open-ended trade wars. That possibility cannot be discounted because Trump's term will be for 4 years. It is 3 weeks now into the term, and already you're seeing repercussions. He's also talking about having another term, third term. So in heart of heart, it appears that he does not want to leave the office at the end of the term. So if you do not have a predictable system
Mm,
and you have a highly narcissistic individual who
mm,
is bent on dominating everyone else, whether economically, whether whatever way, you will have some conflicts in the world. So the world or the countries in the world will have to prepare for some sort of trade conflict, either individually or, you know, rupture of the global trading system, which is heavily dominated in favor of United States at this point in time, if I may point it out, because they control all the institutions, Bretton Woods institutions like IMF, World Bank. Dollar is still the international reserve currency. So it is an advantage US, but if you deliberately, intentionally wreck that system, then every country will try to take advantage of whatever is the aftermath of that global trade war.
Coming to my last question, how will Trump's anti-China and anti-globalization stance shape India's role in the world?
Trump is not overtly hostile to India, and that is seen in the choice of foreign leaders that he is inviting. So the first foreign leader is Benjamin Netanyahu. Second is Japanese Prime Minister Ishida. And third would be Prime Minister Modi. As far as Netanyahu is concerned, he has ostensibly taken promises to hand over the Gaza Strip to United States. As far as Japan is concerned, Japanese Prime Minister has already assured $1 trillion investment in United States. So that speaks for itself.
Yeah.
What be the benchmarks with India? What demands would be made? Of course, return of illegal immigrants to US, and I have no qualms about that. These people should not be going illegally. That is highly stupid for
Yeah.
themselves, and it's a blot on the nation.
Yeah.
So that is one issue. But in the first term, Trump has called India the currency manipulator. India is the tariff king. In the first term, he refused to sign a bilateral free trade agreement with India in the last few months of his presidency. He will try to sell American hardware to India. So India may not be exempt in future from CATSA. Already he has he scrapped the waiver given to India on Charbar port development.
Okay.
So his aim is to have trade advantage. And at this point in time, bilateral India-US trade, which is around, I think, 130, 140 US billion dollars, is in favor of India. India has a trade advantage, and he would try to, either equalize or have it in favor of United States by selling more armaments to India. So that would be his goal. But on February 12th and for February 13th, we will see how Mr. Modi deals with his demands and what is the outcome of that. India is not considered a hostile country by Trump 2.0 administration. That is good. And ultimate outcome in terms of, US-China conflict, whether it's a trading conflict or other conflict, would be to India's advantage. It will depend upon how India plays her cards with this gentleman who is highly narcissistic,
Yeah.
highly unpredictable, highly chaotic, but wants to preserve the US advantage in the international system.
So thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. Thank you so much. That was all the question I had for today's session. That was really an eye-opening discussion. As we have seen, a second Trump presidency could shake up Europe, disrupt global stability, and create a new challenges and opportunities for India. The big question is, how should India navigate this evolving landscape? A huge thank you to you, Dr. Adityanjee, for sharing your invaluable insights. And to our viewers, stay tuned for more episodes on Global Focus.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for inviting me. My last parting words would be I've talked about, a doctrine of Indian exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Generally, the US policy establishment talks about US exceptionalism, but I've talked about doctrine of Indian exceptionalism, and it is Indian exceptionalism that has stood by India in all crises in the past. And I'm pretty sure it'll be the Indian exceptionalism and Indian resilience and Indian jugaad, whatever you may call it, that will come to India's aid in dealing in an unpredictable world in a system which is ostensibly globalized, but which is going through a lot of conflicts and a lot of ripples. And these ripples might become tsunami waves, large waves, and India's steadfastness will determine how India takes these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, viewers. So if you like the discussion, please like the video and share the video. And if you have any thoughts on your mind, do share with us. We'll be answering your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Bye.